On a clear winter morning, Sergeant Griffin Lockridge was finally driving toward the future he had fought 2 years to reclaim. Behind him, his K9 partner Cinder waited in the patrol SUV, steady, trained, and ready for the test that could change everything. Then Griffin saw an old Ford Taurus buried in a snowy ditch, and a widow walking away from it with one shoe missing. He could have kept driving, and by every rule of timing, maybe he should have. But Cinder saw her fall, and Griffin turned back, never knowing that one stop would cost him more than once. What he lost on that road would lead him to a porch, an old radio, a final voicemail, and a word he thought grief had taken from him. Tell us where you're watching from, and please like, share, and subscribe if this story reminds you that some detours bring us home. The morning after the storm looked almost too clean to be trusted. Snow lay across the Finger Lakes in wide, unbroken sheets, bright under a pale blue February sky. The fields outside Lake Briar rolled away in soft white rises, their fences reduced to dark lines and their barns capped with silver. Farther west, Lake Windermere sat frozen at the edges, its surface catching the sun in hard flashes that made the whole world seem calm from a distance. Sergeant Griffin Lockridge knew better than to trust distance. He drove with both hands on the wheel of the department's K9 unit, a dark Navy SUV fitted with a rear kennel, dash camera, thermal blanket kit, and more winter gear than most people kept in their homes. The road had been plowed once before sunrise, but wind had dragged loose snow back across the asphalt in pale ribbons. Every curve demanded attention. Every shadow could hide black ice. Behind him, Cinder lay inside the secured K9 compartment, harnessed and quiet. The German shepherd's black and tan coat stood out against the gray interior padding. His dark saddle dropped lower over his right hip, uneven in a way Griffin could recognize even in poor light. One ear had a small V-shaped notch near the tip. His amber eyes watched the road through the side window with the patience of an animal that understood work did not begin with noise. It began with waiting. Griffin glanced at the dashboard clock, 7:18. The final evaluation at North Valley Public Safety Center started at 8:30. He had planned the route twice, checked the weather 3 times, and left home early enough to account for slow traffic. That was the kind of man people said he was. Prepared, exact, difficult to surprise. They rarely understood that preparation could become a kind of fear. For nearly 2 years, Griffin had worked toward this morning: physical assessments, K9 readiness reviews, psychological clearances, cold weather rescue drills, interviews with people who looked at him kindly and asked questions as if kindness made them less sharp. The interagency winter K9 response team was not just another assignment. To Griffin, it had become proof that one bad day on a frozen lake had not marked the end of the man he used to be. The official investigation had cleared him. That sentence had been written in black ink on government letterhead. It had not cleared him in the quiet hours before dawn, when he still heard ice cracking under weight and a voice calling his name from somewhere white and impossible to reach. Cinder shifted behind him. Griffin checked the rear camera. Easy, boy. Cinder did not settle. The dog rose in one smooth movement, paws planted, body angled toward the right side window. His ears came forward, his tail lowered and went still. Then he gave one short, controlled sound. Not a bark, not alarm enough to be dramatic, but clear enough that Griffin's hand tightened on the wheel. A trained alert. Griffin slowed. At first he saw only the ditch, then the old car appeared. A Ford Taurus, faded green beneath a coat of snow, sat nose down in the shallow roadside trench. Its rear end pointed awkwardly toward the road. No hazard lights blinked. No steam rose from the hood. The driver's door hung half open. Griffin's eyes moved ahead. 30, maybe 40 yards beyond the car, an elderly woman struggled along the shoulder. She wore a pale cardigan under a long sweater already darkened by melted snow. A burgundy scarf hung loose from one shoulder instead of around her neck. One foot was in a brown winter shoe. The other was covered only by a thick sock, now wet and gray from the road slush. Her silver-white hair was pinned on one side with something metallic, but most of it had come loose in the wind. She took 3 steps, stopped, and touched the air as if searching for a wall that was not there. Griffin eased off the gas. His first thought was professional, vehicle off roadway, elderly female, possible exposure, possible medical distress. His second thought was the clock, 7:21. He had time to radio it in. He had time to give the location and continue. A county unit could respond. Someone from the nearest village would be closer than he was once dispatch routed the call. He was on duty, yes, but he was also under orders to report to North Valley. The evaluation panel had been assembled from 3 counties. The practical part of his mind began arranging reasons with the speed of a man who had survived by making decisions quickly. Then Cinder turned all the way around inside the kennel and looked through the rear glass. Griffin passed the woman. The SUV rolled another 50 yards. The steering wheel felt wrong beneath his hands, too smooth, too obedient. In the mirror, the woman reached a road sign and rested one hand against its metal post. Her head lowered. For 1 second she remained standing. Then her knees folded, not all at once, but slowly, as if her body were asking permission to quit. Griffin hit the brakes. The tires grabbed, slipped, and caught again. Snow snapped beneath the vehicle as he pulled onto the shoulder and turned on the emergency lights. Red and blue strobed across the white fields, bright enough to make the morning look broken. He reached for the radio. Lake Briar K97 to dispatch. I've got an elderly female down near County Route 16, east of Wintermere Access Road. Vehicle off the roadway approximately 40 yards behind her. Possible hypothermia, possible cardiac involvement. Start EMS and county backup. Dispatch answered with the clipped calm of winter emergencies. Griffin was already reversing. The dash camera recorded the whole movement, the passing vehicle, the brake lights, the turn, the slow approach back toward the woman in the snow. When Griffin stepped out, the cold met him hard. He pulled on gloves as he moved, keeping his posture open and his voice low. The woman had not fully lost consciousness. She was on one knee beside the signpost, one hand pressed to her chest, the other buried in the snow as if she were trying to hold the earth steady. "Mom," Griffin called, stopping several feet away. "I'm Sergeant Lockridge with Lake Briar Police Help. Is on the way." She lifted her face. Her eyes were green-gray, sharp in shape but unfocused in use. Snow clung to her lashes. Her lips moved before sound came. "My car," she said. "I see it. I need to get back to it. We're not going back to the car right now." Her attention slipped past him toward the Taurus. "Arthur will wonder where I am." Griffin paused at the name, not because he understood it, but because the way she said it was not present tense in the ordinary sense. It sounded like a door opening onto a room years away. "What's your name?" She blinked, offended by the question. "Mavis." "Okay, Mavis. Can I check your pulse? I don't need all this fuss. That might be true," Griffin said, kneeling slowly so he did not tower over her. "But I'd like to be wrong from closer up." That earned him a look. Even half frozen and confused, she had pride left. Her wrist was cold under his gloved fingers. The pulse was too fast, irregular enough to make his chest tighten. Her breathing came in shallow bursts. He returned to the SUV for the thermal blanket and emergency kit. Cinder watched from behind the barrier, ears forward, body controlled. The dog did not paw, bark, or force himself into the moment. Good, Griffin thought. Stay. When he came back, Mavis had tried to stand again. No, Griffin said, firmer this time. My phone died, she muttered. There was supposed to be a store. There isn't one close enough to walk to. Well, that seems poorly planned. The humor was dry, automatic, and fragile. Griffin wrapped the thermal blanket around her shoulders. Her gaze moved to the SUV. Cinder stood visible through the rear glass. For the first time, something in Mavis softened. Oh, she whispered, that's a serious fellow. Griffin followed her eyes. His name is Cinder. Cinder, she repeated, as if testing whether the name belonged to the dog or the morning. Her breathing hitched again, quicker now. Panic rose as memory failed her a second time. My car, she said. I left my bag. I don't know where. Where did I? Look at me, Mavis. I need to go back. The car is being handled. No, I have to. Griffin heard the shift in her voice, the thin edge where confusion became fear. He looked at Cinder, then made the decision. He returned to the vehicle, clipped on the leash, and opened the rear door. Cinder waited until Griffin gave the command. Only then did the German shepherd step down into the snow. Mavis stared at him. Her breathing was still uneven, but her focus had found a place to land. Griffin kept Cinder at a careful distance. Down. Cinder lowered himself onto the snow several feet in front of Mavis, chest steady, head lifted but not pushing forward. He did not crowd her. He did not ask for touch. He simply stayed. Mavis reached out with a shaking hand. Her fingers settled on the thick fur near his shoulder. Cinder did not move. The wind crossed the empty road, carrying loose snow over Griffin's boots. In the distance, sirens began to rise. Mavis matched one breath to the dog's stillness, then another. By the time EMS arrived, she was cold, frightened, and still confused, but she was no longer fighting to stand. The paramedics moved carefully. One was a broad-shouldered woman with a calm voice and a red knit cap tucked under her helmet. She asked Griffin for the timeline while another checked Mavis's temperature and blood pressure. Griffin gave the details cleanly. Disabled vehicle, unknown exposure duration, altered orientation, irregular pulse, no ID located yet. Mavis objected once when they loaded her onto the stretcher. Cinder lifted his head. She saw him and stopped. At Lake County Medical Center, Griffin intended to complete the handoff and leave. That was still the plan when he parked outside the emergency entrance. It was still the plan when he gave the intake nurse Mavis's name, the little he had, and the location of the Taurus. It was still the plan when he checked the time and saw 7:58. Then Mavis tried to leave. She swung one leg off the examination bed and told a nurse she had to get back to her car before Arthur came looking. Her voice was stronger now, but no clearer. When the nurse gently blocked her, Mavis became embarrassed, then frightened, then angry at herself for not knowing which house she lived in. Cinder, waiting on a loose leash beside Griffin, made one quiet sound. Mavis turned toward him. "Cinder," she said, as if the dog were the only fact that had not shifted. Griffin stood beside the curtain and felt the evaluation slipping away minute by minute. He called dispatch again. He confirmed the Taurus had been located and a county deputy was on scene. He filed the preliminary vulnerable person report from the hallway. He waited while hospital staff searched for records under the name Mavis Wainwright and found 3 possible addresses, 2 outdated phone numbers, and no immediate family contact. At 8:19, the emergency department called for Nadine Crowhurst. She arrived with a folder tucked under one arm and a winter coat still dusted with snow at the shoulders. She was in her early 40s, with dark hair tied low, narrow black glasses, and the composed expression of someone accustomed to stepping into rooms where everyone else had run out of simple answers. "You're Sergeant Lockridge?" she asked. "Yes, I'm Nadine, hospital social work. Tell me what we know." He did. Nadine listened without wasting time, asked 3 precise questions, then went in to speak with Mavis in a voice that was neither too loud nor too gentle. Griffin respected that immediately. She did not treat age like childhood. Mavis answered some things, missed others, and scolded Nadine for calling the Taurus older. "It is not older," Mavis said from behind the curtain. "It is loyal." Nadine looked back at Griffin. For the first time that morning, almost despite himself, Griffin felt the corner of his mouth move. At 8:34 he knew. The field evaluation had started. He stepped into the hall and called North Valley. The line rang 4 times before someone answered. Griffin gave his name, his badge number, and the reason he was not there. He kept the explanation short. There was no point decorating it. The administrator on the other end went quiet, then told him what he already understood. Once the field portion began, no late entry was permitted. The evaluators were already moving to the first scenario site. His absence would be documented. Griffin thanked her. When he ended the call, he stood for a moment beneath the fluorescent hospital lights, phone still in his hand. Cinder leaned lightly against his leg, not enough to comfort him in any obvious way. Just enough to remind him he was not standing alone. Later, a physician confirmed what Griffin had suspected: mild hypothermia, dehydration, cardiac rhythm irregularity requiring monitoring, Another hour outside could have changed the entire conversation. Mavis was warmer by then, wrapped in blankets, cheeks returning to color. Nadine had verified her address near Lake Windermere and reached a neighbor who had a spare key. Griffin finally stepped into the room to leave. Mavis looked smaller under hospital blankets, but her eyes had sharpened. The metallic leaf clip had been removed from her hair and placed on the bedside table beside her wedding ring. "You're going," she said. "I have to. Where were you headed before I made a spectacle of myself?" Griffin looked through the glass partition at Cinder waiting in the hall. The dog sat tall, harness still on, amber eyes fixed on him. For a second, Griffin considered giving the easy answer. Training, work, an appointment. Instead, he told the truth. To a place that could decide whether I'm still useful. Mavis studied him as if she understood less than the words, but more than the tone. Then she nodded once. "Well," she said quietly, "that sounds like the sort of place that should know what you did before you got there." Griffin did not answer. He only picked up his gloves, gave her a small nod, and walked back into the bright winter morning, where the road to North Valley was already closing behind him. By the time Griffin reached North Valley Public Safety Center, the snow outside had begun to melt from the roof lines. It dripped in bright, steady threads from the gutters and struck the pavement in a rhythm that sounded almost cheerful. The kind of sound people noticed when a storm had passed and the world had decided to keep going. Griffin parked beside a row of emergency vehicles already dusted with salt and tire spray. A rescue truck from Monroe County sat with its rear doors open. Two handlers loaded K9 gear into the back. Farther across the lot, a man in a flight jacket spoke into a phone while walking toward a waiting SUV. The field evaluation was not beginning, it was ending. Cinder stood in the rear compartment, quiet but alert, his amber eyes following Griffin through the glass as if he could read the answer before the door opened. Griffin shut off the engine and sat for one extra second. There were few things he hated more than arriving after a decision had already been made. Inside, the lobby smelled of wet boots, coffee, and floor cleaner. A plastic sign pointed toward the winter response briefing room. Griffin followed it down a hallway lined with framed photographs of rescue teams, helicopters, avalanche probes, and K9 units standing in snow up to their chests. He did not slow for the photographs. At the end of the hall, a large training room stood open. Tables had been pushed out of formation. Cases of equipment sat half-packed near the wall. A map of the North Valley mock search grounds still glowed on a monitor at the front of the room, marked with colored search grids that no longer had anything to do with him. A man in a charcoal field jacket looked up from a waterproof clipboard. He had square shoulders, a neatly trimmed salt and pepper beard, and the stillness of someone who did not waste energy proving authority. His glasses had thin titanium frames. His eyes were dark, steady, and not unkind. "Sergeant Lockridge," he said. Griffin stopped just inside the doorway. "Deputy Director Greaves." Alton Greaves checked the time, though Griffin knew he did not need to. Men like Greaves always knew the time. "I received the call from the administrator," Greaves said, "and your dispatch report." Griffin removed his gloves. The subject was transported to Lake County Medical. Vulnerable person report filed. County deputy secured the disabled vehicle. Hospital social work took over the care plan. Greaves nodded once, writing nothing down. "I saw the preliminary entry. No one here is questioning whether the incident happened." Some part of Griffin had prepared for accusation. It would have been easier, maybe, if someone had been angry. Anger gave a man something to stand against. Greaves gave him only procedure. "The dash camera will confirm your route," he continued. "Dispatch has your timestamp. The medical center logged your arrival. The situation appears to have been legitimate and urgent." "Yes, sir. That does not change the structure of this evaluation." Griffin looked toward the monitor. On the screen, a red search sector curved through a simulated ravine. He could picture the exercise without anyone explaining it. Handler release point, scent, article, search corridor, weather interference, medical extraction timing, team communication under stress. He had studied for every piece of it. Greaves followed his gaze. This was not an interview panel we could pause. We had EMS, aviation simulation, 3 K9 evaluators, an embedded psychologist, and 2 ground teams assigned to the field portion. One evaluator has to return to Buffalo before the lake effect system moves east. 2 handlers were reassigned to a real missing person operation near Old Forge. By noon, half the structure is gone. Griffin did not answer. The words were reasonable. That made them worse. Greaves set the clipboard on the table. The winter cycle begins in 10 days. Next evaluation slot is 5 weeks out. By then the active training phase will already be underway. So I'm out. For this cycle, Greaves said. For this cycle sounded cleaner than it felt. A season was not just a block on a calendar. Winter search work had its own timing, its own rhythm, its own narrow window when snow, ice, and human error combined to create the kind of calls Griffin had trained for. Missing this cycle meant watching others go where he had spent 2 years trying to return. Greaves did not soften his voice. Your file will state that you missed the final field evaluation due to an emergency response while on duty. It will not state failure. It will not state refusal. It will not state disciplinary concern. Griffin gave a short nod. That was fair. Fairness, he was learning again, did not always feel merciful. From the hallway came the sound of a dog barking once, followed by a handler's quiet correction. Cinder answered with silence from the vehicle outside. Even through 2 walls and a parking lot, Griffin could imagine him sitting straight, waiting for a command that would not come. Greaves watched him for a moment. You made a call this morning, he said. The kind this work requires. Griffin looked back at him. Then why does it feel like the call disqualified me from doing the work? Greaves did not rush to fill the silence. That restraint made Griffin respect him more and dislike the answer before hearing it. Because rescue work is full of moments where the right action still carries a cost, Greaves said. The board can recognize the action without erasing the cost. There it was, no villain, no injustice sharp enough to hate, just a door closing with everyone's hands clean. Griffin thanked him because there was nothing else to do. Greaves offered to have the administrative office send confirmation to Lake Briar Police. Griffin accepted. They shook hands. The gesture was firm and professional and finished. Outside, the sun struck the wet pavement so brightly it hurt his eyes. Cinder's tail moved once when Griffin opened the rear door. Not a wag, more an acknowledgement. Not today, Griffin said. Cinder looked at him, then stepped down only when released. They stood together in the parking lot while another K9 team drove away toward the training grounds. The dog in the other vehicle had its head turned toward the wind, ears high, ready for work. Cinder watched it go. Griffin clipped on the leash and returned to the SUV. The drive back to Lake Briar took longer than it should have. Traffic slowed behind plows. A school bus idled near a road crew, clearing snowbanks from an intersection. At one point, Griffin passed a frozen pond where 2 boys in bright coats were sliding across the safe, shallow edge while their father watched from the bank. He looked away before memory could sharpen. At home, he carried the gear bag inside and set it beside the door where it had been that morning. The winter response uniform still hung in the narrow storage room, zipped inside a clear garment cover. The patch on the shoulder was temporary, issued for candidates during the evaluation process. He should have returned it immediately. Instead, he left it hanging. Cinder moved through the house behind him, not crowding, not demanding. The German Shepherd inspected his water bowl, circled the living room once, then lay down near the hallway where he could see both Griffin and the door. Griffin opened his phone. Messages waited. A photo from a handler he knew in Rochester. Snow course is brutal this year. Another from a team leader. Hope you made it, man. Then a group chat update from North Valley. Candidate teams proceeding to night nav module. Griffin read all of them. He answered none. For the next several days, he returned to regular duty. Lake Briar needed police work whether he had passed a field evaluation or not. Snowbanks narrowed streets. Older residents called about carbon monoxide detectors chirping in basements. A teenager backed into a mailbox and cried harder than the damage required. A man at the grocery store accused another of stealing rock salt from his cart. A woman reported footprints around her garage that turned out to belong to her own nephew. Griffin handled each call cleanly. He wrote reports, he checked addresses. He let Cinder work when Cinder was needed and rest when he was not. No one could say he failed to do his job. That was not the same as being present inside it. On the fourth afternoon, Chief Delmont Avery called him into his office. Avery's office was warm in the way old police buildings became warm. Radiator heat, paper files, burnt coffee, and the faint smell of wool coats drying on hooks. The chief stood by the window with a mug in one hand. He was a broad man in his late 50s, with closely cropped silver hair, a trimmed silver mustache, and a voice that rarely needed volume to carry weight. "You sleeping?" Avery asked. Griffin remained standing. "Enough. That means no. It means enough to work." Avery turned from the window. That wasn't the question. Griffin said nothing. The chief let it pass, for now. He picked up a folder from his desk and held it out. "I want you to look at this again." Griffin did not take it. He recognized the label, Winter Welfare Response Pilot. "I already read the outline," he said. "You skimmed it. I understand the concept." "No," Avery said. "You understand the paperwork. You don't understand the work." Griffin's jaw tightened. Avery saw it and continued anyway. People living alone. Medical devices that fail when power goes out. Dementia patients walking into snow. Folks who won't evacuate because shelters won't take their animals. Neighbors who know something's wrong but don't know who to call. That sound like paperwork to you? It sounds important, but not important enough for you. Griffin met his eyes. "Chief, you still think if there isn't a ravine, a helicopter, and a dog tracking through waist-deep snow, it doesn't count as rescue?" The words struck too close, and Avery knew it. Griffin took the folder because refusing it would have said more than accepting. Avery's tone softened by a fraction. "I'm not asking for an answer today. Read it properly. You and Cinder know how to find people. Maybe it's time to think about finding them before they're missing." Griffin left with the folder tucked under his arm. He placed it on the passenger seat. Cinder, from the rear compartment, stared at it for half the drive. 2 days later, Nadine Crowhurst called the station. Griffin was finishing a report when the desk officer leaned into the doorway. "Lockridge, hospital social work on line 2, asking for you specifically." Griffin picked up. Nadine's voice was calm, efficient, and familiar enough to pull him back to the emergency room hallway. "Sergeant Lockridge, I'm calling regarding Mavis Wainwright. She was discharged yesterday afternoon. Part of her care plan includes a welfare check within 48 hours, preferably by a familiar responder. She agreed to police contact and requested you and Cinder, if available." Griffin looked through the glass toward the parking lot. Snow moved lightly beyond the windows. "Is she medically stable?" "Stable enough to be home?" Nadine said. "Not stable enough for everyone to pretend nothing happened. She has a neighbor checking in, but she left a personal item in the ambulance transfer, and I understand your department has information on her vehicle." "I can take it." "Good. And Sergeant?" "Yes?" "She does not need someone to take over her life. She needs a safe handoff." Griffin almost smiled. Understood. Mavis lived 20 minutes outside town, on a road that curved down toward Lake Windermere through bare maples and old stone walls. Her house was small, white, and stubborn-looking, with green shutters and a porch that faced the water. Snow had been cleared from the walk, but unevenly. Someone had done it with determination rather than strength. Griffin parked behind a blue sedan in the driveway. Cinder waited while Griffin gathered Mavis's canvas handbag, the tow company slip for the Taurus, and the hospital discharge contact form Nadine had sent over. When Mavis opened the door, she looked better and smaller at the same time. Her silver hair had been brushed into place and held on one side by a metal leaf clip. A burgundy cardigan wrapped around her narrow shoulders. Her eyes, now clear, moved first to Griffin, then to Cinder. "Well," she said. The serious fellow came back. Cinder stood at the threshold and did not move. Mavis looked down at him. May I invite a police dog into my house, or does he need a warrant? For the first time in days, Griffin laughed under his breath. He needs permission. Then permission granted. Griffin gave the command. Cinder stepped inside, calm and precise. The house smelled of coffee, old books, lemon cleaner, and something sweet cooling in a pan. Family photographs lined a shelf near the living room, most of them featuring a broad-faced man in uniform, smiling as if the camera had interrupted him in the middle of a joke. Arthur, Griffin thought, though Mavis had not yet said the name. He checked what he needed to check because that was why he had come. The porch rail, the floor mats, the heating vents, the emergency numbers near the phone. Mavis watched him with amusement that had an edge of warning. I'm not made of glass, Sergeant. No, Mom. People keep speaking to me as if I misplaced 70 years of good sense in a snowbank. You did leave your car in one. That was mechanical betrayal. Cinder moved to the hearth and settled only after Griffin released him. The dog lowered his head near Mavis's chair, close enough to belong, far enough not to claim. Griffin handed her the bag and the toe slip. Mavis took both, then looked at the document longer than necessary. And the place you were going? Griffin had known the question would come. He still did not have a good way to answer it. It closed. Her hand tightened around the paper. The evaluation? Yes. Because of me. No, that is a kind lie. It's not a lie. He looked toward the window where sunlight lay across the frozen lake. It was because of a decision I made. A decision you made because of me. He did not argue with that. Mavis lowered herself into the chair beside Cinder. For a moment the humor left her face, and what remained was older, quieter, harder to dismiss. I am sorry, she said. Griffin heard no performance in it, no attempt to make him comfort her, just regret, clean and direct. He could have said it did not matter. That would have been the lie. It mattered, he said. Mavis closed her eyes briefly. Then Griffin added, but if I were back on that road, I'd still stop. The room held still around the words. Cinder lifted his head, as if the sentence had changed the air. Mavis looked at Griffin for a long moment, then reached for the coffee pot on the side table. In that case, she said, voice rougher than before, you can sit down before this gets cold. The official welfare check ended after 48 minutes. Griffin knew because he logged the time. The visit itself lasted nearly an hour. Mavis asked about Cinder's training, but not about the frozen lake. Griffin appreciated that. He asked whether her neighbor had a spare key, whether her phone charger was working, and whether she intended to drive the Taurus again before a mechanic looked at it. Mavis answered 2 of those questions honestly and evaded the third. As he stood to leave, she followed him to the porch. The winter sun had begun to lower, turning the lake beyond the trees pale gold. Cinder waited at Griffin's side, his breath visible in the cold. Mavis folded her arms against the chill. There's an old generator in the shed. Arthur kept it running. I have not had the heart or the patience to touch it since he passed. Griffin knew what he should say. He should tell her to call a licensed technician. He should give her a number from the department's winter resource sheet. He should maintain the clean boundary Nadine had warned him not to blur. I can give you a referral, he said. Mavis nodded as if she had expected that. Of course. Cinder stepped forward, just 1 pace, and rested his head gently against Mavis's knee. The movement was not dramatic. It did not feel like fate. It felt like recognition. Mavis placed her hand between his ears. Griffin looked at the old shed behind the house, half buried in snow, then at the woman standing on the porch, pretending not to need anything. Next week, he said. I can look at it next week. Mavis kept her eyes on Cinder, but Griffin saw the small smile. Bring your serious fellow, she said. Griffin clipped Cinder's leash shorter for the walk back to the SUV. I usually do. When he drove away, Mavis remained on the porch until the house disappeared from his rearview mirror. The gear bag was still waiting at home. The uniform was still hanging behind a plastic zipper. The evaluation cycle was still gone. But for the first time since North Valley, Griffin had somewhere to be next week that was not written on any career plan, and that unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. The next week, Griffin arrived with a socket wrench, a replacement fuel line, and a promise he had already told himself not to regret. The sky over Lake Windermere was low and white, the kind of winter sky that made the world feel padded and hushed. Snow stood in clean banks along Mavis Wainwright's driveway. Someone had cleared the walk better this time, though not evenly. The shovel marks curved with a stubbornness Griffin recognized before he saw the woman responsible. Priscilla Moreland opened the front door before he reached the porch. She was small only in height. Everything else about her entered a room before she did. Her plum-colored quilted coat, the red cat-eye glasses perched on her nose, the silver braids pinned low at the back of her head, and the ring of keys that jingled at her wrist like a warning bell. "You must be the sergeant," she said. "Griffin Lockridge." "I know. Mavis said you were tall, serious, and allergic to accepting pie as payment." Behind Griffin, Cinder stood at heel in his black collar, no tactical harness today. His breath rose in pale clouds. Priscilla looked him over with open approval. And this must be the one with manners. Griffin glanced down. "Most days. Good. Come in before Mavis decides she's well enough to supervise from the porch." That was how the second visit began. Not like a rescue, not like a welfare check, but like being pulled into an argument already in progress. Mavis sat in the kitchen, wearing a cream blouse, under a burgundy cardigan, her silver hair clipped back with the small metal leaf Griffin remembered from the hospital. A pill organizer sat unopened on the table beside 2 cups of coffee. "I did not ask for a committee," she said. Priscilla hung her coat on the chair. "You asked a police sergeant to inspect a generator from 1998. Arthur bought that generator in 2003. Then it's practically new," Griffin said. Mavis pointed at him. "Careful. I may start liking you." Cinder waited at the threshold until Griffin gave the quiet release. Only then did he step inside, nose lifting once to take in coffee, wood smoke, old books, and something baking under a towel on the counter. He did not roam. He moved to the corner near the warm air vent and lay down with his head on his paws. Nadine Crowhurst had done her work thoroughly. A printed care plan was clipped to the refrigerator beneath a magnet shaped like a lighthouse. Priscilla was listed as the morning check-in. Griffin was listed as backup contact for severe weather or unreachable neighbor. The pharmacy number was written in thick black marker beside the landline. No one had taken over Mavis's life. They had simply placed a few ropes near the edge. Griffin respected that. He looked at the pill organizer, but did not touch it. "You wanted help setting that up?" Mavis's mouth tightened. Priscilla said nothing. That silence was not accidental. It gave Mavis the dignity of answering for herself. After a moment, Mavis pushed the plastic box toward Griffin. "I forget the evening dose sometimes. Not because I am helpless, because the evening news is irritating and I go to bed angry." "That can happen," Griffin said. "You are not allowed to sound amused." "I wasn't. You were thinking it." He opened the medication list Nadine had printed, read each line aloud, and let Mavis place the pills in the compartments herself. He only checked the labels when she asked. The task took longer than it would have if he had simply done it for her. That, he realized, was the point. Later, he went out to the shed. The generator sat under a tarp beside 2 cracked snow shovels, a stack of tomato cages, and an old fishing cooler with Arthur's name written on it in faded marker. Griffin found stale fuel, a brittle line, a loose connection, and a mouse nest that had nearly become part of the machine's internal architecture. Mavis watched from the kitchen window with a mug in one hand. Priscilla watched from the doorway with a bowl of something that smelled like cinnamon. Cinder watched Griffin. Of the 3, Cinder judged him least. By noon, the generator coughed, spat, then caught. Its rough engine sound rolled across the yard, startling loose snow from the shed roof. Mavis opened the back door. "Well," she called. Arthur would have pretended he got it on the first pull. He sounds like a smart man. He was a terrible liar. Griffin shut the machine down and stepped back. "It'll run, but it needs a proper service before the next storm. I'll write down what to tell the mechanic." Mavis frowned. "You will not take money?" "No." "Then you'll take dinner. I'm on duty later. Dinner before duty is still legal in New York State. Priscilla lifted the bowl. I have witnesses. That was how the visits began to change. At first, every stop had a reason. A generator, a loose railing on the porch, a frozen pipe under the kitchen sink, a burned-out exterior light above the steps. Griffin brought tools, handled one problem at a time, and left before the house could feel too familiar. Mavis allowed help only when the work had a name. She would not permit fussing. She did permit Griffin to scrape ice from the back steps after she nearly slipped while carrying birdseed outside, though she insisted the birds were citizens with expectations. Cinder became part of the pattern without making himself the center of it. He waited at thresholds. He obeyed Griffin's releases. When Mavis crossed the slick porch, he moved slowly beside her but never leaned into her legs or pulled ahead. If she stopped, he stopped. If she laughed at him for being too serious, his ears flicked once as if he had filed the insult for later consideration. Mavis began keeping a small tin of dog biscuits on the counter. Griffin told her Cinder was not supposed to be spoiled. Mavis replied that discipline without biscuits was how empires collapsed. One afternoon, after Griffin tightened the bolts on the porch railing, Mavis asked him to stay for dinner again. He should have declined. He had already fixed the railing. The line between neighborly help and something more personal was becoming harder to mark. Then he saw the table. 2 places were set, not 3. Priscilla had gone home. One bowl sat under the counter for Cinder. The meal was simple: chicken stew, dark bread, sliced apples, but the second place setting unsettled him more than any formal invitation could have. It had been a long time since someone set a place for him without needing him to perform a role first. He stayed. During dinner, Mavis asked about Cinder's training, about how long a K9 worked before retirement, about whether the dog knew when Griffin was pretending to be fine. Dogs notice patterns, Griffin said. So do old women. He looked up. Mavis buttered a piece of bread with deliberate care. People think age makes us sentimental. Sometimes it just gives us a longer record of what men try to hide. Griffin did not know what to do with that, so he drank coffee strong enough to threaten his pulse. After the dishes, he carried a box of tools back to the mudroom. That was when he noticed the radio scanner on a shelf near the garage door. It was older than most equipment still allowed to look official, with a cracked plastic casing, worn dials, and a strip of masking tape on the side reading, Arthur Wainwright, Weather County Home. Griffin lifted it carefully. That thing hasn't worked in years, Mavis said behind him. It's a scanner? Was. Arthur liked to keep an ear on weather bands and public calls before everything became encrypted, digitized, and determined to make him feel ancient. Transmit function? Disabled before he retired. He said a retired chief had no business talking into a channel that had moved on without him. Griffin turned the unit over. Power issue. Maybe speaker corrosion. You can throw it out. Her voice made the sentence false. Griffin looked back. Mavis had crossed her arms, but her eyes were on the scanner as if it were not an object at all, as if it were a chair someone had stopped sitting in. I can look at it, he said. That is not a request, I know. Good, I can still look at it. For once, she did not argue. 3 evenings later, Griffin brought it back. He had replaced the power adapter, cleaned the dials, repaired a loose speaker wire, and resisted the temptation to make it look new. Its scratches belonged to it. So did the masking tape. Mavis stood in the kitchen while he plugged it in. Cinder lay near the stove, chin on his paws. Outside, evening snow moved past the windows in slow, harmless flakes. At first there was only static. Then the weather band came through, thin and tinny, announcing overnight lows and lake effect accumulation north of the county line. Griffin adjusted the dial. Static broke again. A country song emerged, old and warm and slightly warped by the speaker. Mavis stopped breathing for one visible second. Her hand went to the edge of the counter. She did not cry, not then. She turned away from Griffin and stared at the dark glass of the kitchen window, where her reflection stood beside the reflection of a man who was no longer there. Arthur played that every Sunday morning, she said. Griffin reached for the scanner. I can turn it off. No. The word was quiet but immediate. The song continued. Cinder lifted his head, then lowered it again, as if deciding the room did not need guarding. It needed room. Mavis's shoulders stayed rigid for a long time. When she finally spoke again, her voice had lost its teasing edge. People always ask what it was like being married to a police chief. They want stories. Big ones. Chases, medals, storms, funerals. They think the dramatic parts are the hard parts. Griffin said nothing. The hard part, Mavis continued, was dinner at 7 and him arriving at 10 with apology in his eyes. It was sleeping through the phone because if I answered too fast, my hands shook. It was knowing every officer's wife by the way she looked at the driveway after midnight. She turned back from the window. Her eyes were wet now, though she had not let the tears fall. Arthur came home more often than some men did. I was lucky, I know that, but lucky still leaves a chair empty eventually. Griffin looked toward the table. 2 cups, 2 plates, a scanner breathing old music into a kitchen that had learned to be quiet. He understood then that Mavis had not invited him into loneliness because she needed fixing. She had let him see it because she trusted him not to make a speech over it. "My mother used to leave porch lights on," he said. Mavis did not move. Griffin wished the sentence back as soon as he heard it. But once the door opened, even a little, the cold came through. "She died while I was away," he said. "I didn't make it back." Mavis lowered herself into a chair, slowly giving the confession somewhere land. Griffin remained standing near the counter. Cinder's eyes opened. "I was helping coordinate a search after a storm downstate," he said. "There were missing hikers, blocked roads, too many calls. My sister tried to reach me first. Then the hospital. By the time I got the message, it was done." "Was she alone?" Mavis asked. The question was gentle, but it struck exactly where it lived. "No, my aunt was there. A nurse was there," he swallowed, "but I wasn't." Mavis nodded, as if she understood the difference. "There's a message," he said, "on my phone. Last one she left me. I've never played it, because you think she might blame you." He let out a breath that almost became a laugh. "Because if she doesn't, I won't know who to argue with." Mavis did not offer comfort too quickly. That was one of the reasons Griffin kept speaking. He told her about the frozen lake. Not all of it, not the worst sounds, not the name of the volunteer who had died, but enough: the late call, the unstable ice. The decision to push forward 5 more minutes because the missing man had been reported confused, underdressed, and close to the shoreline. The crack that ran under the rescue team like a living thing. "The report cleared me," he said, "but you did not clear yourself." No, the song on the scanner ended. A weather announcer returned, warning about icy steps and morning refreeze. Mavis reached across the table and placed her hand near his, not on top of it. Close enough to offer, far enough to let him refuse. "You don't need me to tell you it wasn't your fault," she said. "You've had professionals say that, I imagine." "Yes, and you didn't believe them." "No. Then I won't waste good breath repeating what you aren't ready to hear." For some reason, that helped more than reassurance. Griffin sat down. They remained there until the coffee went cold, and Cinder fell asleep beside the stove. Later that evening, Griffin drove to his therapy appointment instead of canceling it. Dr. Elise Varn, his therapist, kept an office above a pharmacy on Main Street. She was a compact woman in her 50s with silver-threaded black hair, soft cardigans, and a gaze that made evasion feel more tiring than honesty. Griffin had spent months giving her clean summaries of symptoms, sleep patterns, and work stress. That night he told her about Mavis, not as a case, not as an elderly woman from a welfare check, as Mavis. He told her about the scanner, the song, Arthur's empty chair, and the way Mavis had understood absence without asking for a war story or a police story. Then, after a long silence, he said what he had not wanted to say anywhere. "I think I wanted the winter team to prove the lake didn't end me." Dr. Varn did not write immediately. She let him hear the sentence in the room. "And if it doesn't prove that?" she asked. Griffin looked down at his hands. His thumb found the pale scar near his wrist and pressed against it. "I don't know what does." That was the first honest answer he had given her in weeks. That night, Griffin came home to a dark house that did not feel welcoming, Exactly, but did not feel like a punishment either. He fed Cinder, hung his coat, and sat on the edge of the bed with his phone in his hand. His mother's last message remained where it had always been, saved under her name, untouched. He did not play it, not yet. But for the first time, he did not close the screen immediately. Cinder came into the room and lay beside the bed, his notched ear angled toward Griffin. "Not tonight," Griffin said softly. Cinder rested his head on his paws. Hours later, Griffin woke just before dawn. The room was gray-blue. Snow reflected faint light through the curtains. Cinder slept on the floor beside him, breathing slow and even. There had been dreams. Broken ones. Ice, voices, a porch light far away. But no shouting, no violent waking, no moment of reaching for something that was not there. Griffin sat up and listened to the quiet. The grief was still there. The lost evaluation was still there. The lake was still there. But somewhere across town, an old scanner had a voice again. A woman beside a frozen lake had begun making coffee for two. A dog who followed commands better than most men followed promises had chosen the warm patch near her stove. For the first time in months, Griffin did not feel fixed. He simply felt less alone. And at that hour, with morning gathering slowly at the windows, less alone was enough. Mavis Wainwright had spent enough years near emergency dispatch to know that the truth did not always arrive in one piece. Sometimes it came as a timestamp, sometimes as a radio log, sometimes as a signature at the bottom of a form no one wanted to read until something had already gone wrong. For nearly 3 weeks after Griffin repaired Arthur's old scanner, she watched him arrive and leave with the same careful restraint. He fixed what needed fixing. He asked practical questions. He listened when she spoke, though he rarely let his own feelings stay visible for long. He was not a man collapsing under disappointment. That would have been easier to recognize. Griffin was worse than that. He was becoming useful in smaller and smaller ways, as if shrinking the size of his service might keep him from feeling the size of what he had lost. One Thursday morning, while Cinder lay near the kitchen vent and Griffin tightened the loose screws on the storm door latch, Mavis saw him glance toward his phone. A message lit the screen. She did not read it. She had not survived 77 years by pretending curiosity was the same as manners. But she saw enough. The beginning of a photo, snow gear, several figures standing beside a rescue sled, to understand. Griffin turned the phone face down. He returned to the screws, his hand remained steady. That was how Mavis knew the hurt had gone deep. After he left, she sat at the kitchen table with Arthur's old address book open beneath the yellow light. The book smelled faintly of paper dust and leather. Names from another life filled the pages in Arthur's handwriting. Some were crossed out. Some had small notes beside them: retired, moved south, bad hip, call before Christmas. One name had not been crossed out: Walter Pemberton. Mavis tapped the page once, then twice. Arthur had trusted Walter, which did not mean Mavis intended to ask him for a favor. Favors had a way of turning honest men into debts. Arthur used to say that if a case could not stand in daylight, it had no business being carried through a side door. Mavis agreed with that. Still, she also knew something else. A file could be complete and incomplete at the same time. She dialed before courage cooled. Walter answered on the 6th ring with a voice that sounded older than she remembered but no less precise. "Mavis? You still take your time with the telephone," she said, "and you still begin conversations as if the other person has already lost the argument." That made her smile despite herself. Walter Pemberton lived 2 counties over now, in a brick house full of old books and polished silence. He had once served as director of the state police, but age had bent his shoulders and slowed his walk. It had not softened his standards. When Mavis explained what had happened, the roadside, the hospital, Griffin's missed evaluation, the way the official record seemed too narrow for the choice he had made, Walter listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said nothing for several seconds. Then, "What exactly are you asking me to do?" "Nothing crooked. Good. I'm too old to begin disappointing Arthur now. I don't want Griffin handed anything he didn't earn." "Then don't ask for that. I'm not. What do you want?" Mavis looked toward the window. Across the yard, wind lifted dry snow from the roof of the shed Griffin had repaired. I want the record to show the whole morning, not just that he missed where he was supposed to be. Walter exhaled slowly. There is a process. Tell me, he did. No promises, no dramatic phone calls, no old friend calling in a debt. Griffin could not be granted a result because a retired director admired Arthur Wainwright. But the board could consider whether his absence resulted from a documented emergency response, and whether that response reflected relevant judgment for Winter Rescue Command. Mavis wrote everything down. Her hand cramped halfway through. She changed pens and continued. The next morning, Nadine Crowhurst came by with a folder and a calm warning. "I want to be clear," Nadine said, sitting across from Mavis at the kitchen table. Her dark hair was tied low. Snowmelt darkened the hem of her coat. "You have the right to authorize limited release of your hospital information. You do not have to do this. I know, and Sergeant Lockridge has not asked you to do this. He would rather fall through another lake." Nadine's mouth twitched. "Probably." Mavis adjusted her glasses. "I am not releasing anything private beyond what is necessary. That is exactly why I'm here." Together they went through the forms line by line. Admission time, initial condition, transfer notes, the fact that Griffin remained until a lawful handoff could be arranged, no detailed medical history, no diagnosis beyond what was relevant to the emergency. Mavis signed where Nadine indicated. The pen felt heavier than it should have, not because she doubted the decision, but because she understood its boundary. She was not saving Griffin. She was not paying him back. She was simply telling the part of the truth that belonged to her. Walter sent his letter 2 days later. He mailed Mavis a copy before sending the official version to the board. The letter was shorter than she expected. It did not praise Griffin as a hero. It did not mention Arthur, except to identify how Walter knew Mavis. It did not ask anyone to lower a standard. It asked only whether a candidate's documented decision during an active emergency should be evaluated as evidence of field judgment rather than treated solely as non-attendance. Mavis read that sentence 3 times. Then she folded the paper and placed it beneath the scanner on the kitchen shelf. At North Valley, Alton Greaves received the request with the expression of a man who disliked surprises but respected properly completed paperwork. He did not call Walter. He did not call Mavis for a moving account of the morning. He opened a review file, dash camera from the Lake Briar K9 unit, GPS route history, dispatch radio log, county deputy report on the Taurus, hospital handoff confirmation from Nadine, updated training records for Griffin and Cinder, current psychological readiness note from Dr. Elise Varn. Alton laid each piece into the file because emotion, to be considered fairly, had to survive contact with evidence. The dash footage stayed with him longer than he expected. It showed Griffin passing the woman in the snow, then the brake lights, then the reverse. No hesitation worth dramatizing, no grand gesture. Just a vehicle stopping because its driver had seen a human being fall. Alton paused the video once on Cinder's reflection in the rear barrier, ears forward, body controlled, waiting for command. He closed the laptop after that. The question before the board was not whether Griffin had been kind. Kindness was not a certification category. The question was whether he could make a costly decision under pressure, follow procedure, protect the vulnerable person, communicate cleanly, and accept the consequence without turning the system into an enemy. That was harder to measure. It was also exactly the kind of thing Winter Rescue had a way of demanding. While the file moved quietly through official hands, Griffin knew nothing about it. He kept showing up at Mavis's house with practical excuses. A motion light over Priscilla's back steps had failed, and Griffin replaced it because Priscilla claimed she would rather insult a ladder than climb one. The pipe under Mavis's sink rattled whenever the dishwasher drained, so he secured it. He drove Mavis to a follow-up appointment with Dr. Celeste Norwood, who had the brisk gentleness of someone who could deliver unwelcome news without making it sound like a sentence. Dr. Norwood's office overlooked a parking lot glazed with ice, She wore blue-framed glasses and spoke directly to Mavis before she spoke to Griffin, a quality Mavis clearly appreciated. "The rhythm event you had outside was not something I want to ignore," the doctor said. "You're stable. You're independent. Those things are both true. I'm still ordering a temporary monitor." Mavis sighed. "I was hoping for a sticker and a dismissal." "You may have the sticker after you wear the monitor." Griffin did not smile, but Cinder, lying beneath the exam room chair, lifted his head at Mavis's offended silence. The small device arrived the next week. Mavis hated it immediately. "It looks like a garage door opener designed by someone who dislikes women's clothing," she said. "Wear it anyway," Griffin replied. "Bossy. Alive." She looked at him then, and the argument softened before it could become real. There were moments like that now. Brief, unplanned openings where neither of them said what they meant, yet both understood. He noticed how she paused halfway up the stairs to catch her breath and pretended to admire a framed photograph. He noticed how she gripped the edge of the counter after standing too quickly. He noticed that her jokes came faster when she was more tired. She noticed his phone still went unanswered when messages from the winter team appeared. She noticed the folder from Chief Avery's pilot program had moved from the passenger seat to his kitchen table, then to the front seat again, as if Griffin kept taking it places without admitting he was reading it. Delmont Avery noticed too. One evening after shift change, the chief found Griffin in the garage bay, checking Cinder's harness buckles with more concentration than the task required. "Pilot outline," Avery said. "You read it?" "Parts. That's more than last time." Griffin fastened the final buckle. "It needs structure. It has structure. It has categories. That's not the same." Avery leaned against a workbench. "Then mark it up." Griffin looked at him. The chief's silver mustache shifted with the beginning of a smile. "You have opinions, Sergeant. Try putting them on paper instead of punishing the harness." Griffin did not agree. He also did not refuse. That night he sat at his kitchen table with the winter welfare folder open, a pen in his right hand, Cinder asleep near his boots. At first he wrote corrections, then questions, then names of agencies the plan forgot: pharmacy delivery, animal shelter transport, oxygen suppliers, volunteer drivers, Lake Road plow priority. He stopped after midnight, surprised by the page in front of him. It was not the work he had wanted. It was still work that could keep someone from becoming a search call. 2 days later, the opening appeared. A candidate from the winter response cycle injured his knee during night navigation training. Not badly enough to end his career, but enough to withdraw. North Valley had one empty assessment slot before the final training roster closed. The board met for 42 minutes. Alton Greaves presented the file without embellishment. He noted the emergency response. He noted the verified handoff. He noted Griffin's recent evaluations, Cinder's training status, and the absence of any disciplinary issue. He also noted that no standard could be waived. The decision was narrow but clean. Griffin would be permitted to take the full field assessment. Nothing more. Nothing less. When Alton called him, Griffin was standing beside his department SUV outside a hardware store, loading ice melt for a senior apartment complex. "Sergeant Lockridge," Alton said. "A supplemental evaluation slot has opened 2 days from now. The board has reviewed your documentation and approved your participation, provided you understand that every component remains mandatory." Griffin did not speak immediately. Cinder, in the rear compartment, tilted his head at the change in Griffin's breathing. "Sergeant, I understand," Griffin said. "This is not a courtesy pass. I wouldn't accept one. I didn't think you would." The call ended less than 3 minutes later. Griffin stood in the cold with one hand on the open cargo door and felt something he had not allowed himself to feel since the morning at North Valley. Not relief, not yet. Possibility. The first person he wanted to tell was Mavis. That realization startled him more than the call. He drove to Lake Windermere after shift, the winter sky already turning peach over the dark trees. Mavis opened the door before he knocked. Cinder waited at the threshold until invited, then crossed directly to the hearth. Griffin told her in the kitchen. For one moment, Mavis simply stared. Then joy moved through her so quickly it frightened him. She pushed herself up from the chair, too fast, one hand flying to the table for balance. Griffin stepped forward. "Mavis, I'm fine. You're dizzy. I am enthusiastic. You're holding the table. Tables are useful." He guided her back into the chair without making it feel like a defeat. She let him, though she rolled her eyes to preserve dignity. Outside, the late sun spread over the snow-covered yard. Inside, the old scanner whispered a weather report no one was listening to. Mavis's smile came back, softer now. "Tell me everything." So he did. The assessment would begin early. It could run 6 hours. If he passed, he would join the remaining winter response training and likely spend much of the season on deployments across the state. Not every week, but enough. Storm calls, missing person searches, remote standby, training rotations. Mavis listened with her hands folded around a mug of tea. Griffin watched the cardiac monitor clipped beneath her sweater shift slightly when she breathed. "You took your medication?" he asked. "Yes, the evening dose?" "Yes. Priscilla has your key?" "She has enough keys to open a small kingdom. Your follow-up with Dr. Norwood." "Confirmed. And if you feel lightheaded, I call Priscilla. If she doesn't answer, I call the clinic. If the weather turns, I do not drive, shovel, climb, or attempt to personally negotiate with a snowbank." He stared at her. Mavis laughed then, a real laugh, bright enough to make Cinder lift his head from the hearth. "Go," she said. "Pass your test, chase your snow, be insufferably competent." Griffin looked away, because the warmth in her voice made something in him unsteady. Mavis reached across the table and patted his hand once. "Con ku dd," she might have said in another life, in another language, if emotion had needed translation. But in that kitchen, with the old scanner humming and the lake turning gold outside, the words came out simply. "You go on. Don't worry about Mom." Silence arrived all at once. Mavis's face changed first. The smile remained, but her eyes widened slightly, as if she had reached for one cup and found another in her hand. Griffin did not move. Cinder rose, not alarmed, only attentive. "I didn't mean," Mavis began. "Okay," Griffin said. The word was quiet, not acceptance of a mistake, not correction. Just a place to set what neither of them was ready to hold in full. Mavis looked down at her tea. Griffin looked toward the window. The snow outside had turned blue in the fading light. After a moment, Mavis cleared her throat. "Well, you still need to eat before you leave." Griffin let the ordinary sentence save them both. "Yes, Mom." But when he stepped onto the porch later, the air felt different. The evaluation waited 2 days ahead. The winter team waited beyond that. The future he had spent 2 years chasing had opened a door just wide enough for him and Cinder to pass through. Behind him, inside the house, Mavis was turning on the lamp beside Arthur's old chair. Griffin walked to the SUV slowly. For the first time, the thought of leaving did not feel simple. The morning of the assessment looked merciful. That was what unsettled Griffin most. No storm pressed against the windshield. No trucks crawled ahead of him with hazard lights blinking through whiteout. No loose snow dragged itself across the road like a warning. The sky above Lake Briar was clear enough to show a thin wash of gold along the horizon, and the plowed shoulders rose clean and bright on both sides of the highway. If the world had wanted to make leaving difficult, it had chosen the wrong morning. Griffin had been awake since 4:12. He told himself it was preparation, not nerves. He checked Cinder's harness twice, inspected the leash clips, packed water, first aid supplies, gloves, scent articles, spare batteries, and the waterproof folder North Valley had sent with the reporting instructions. He ate half a piece of toast, standing at the kitchen counter, and threw away the rest before admitting he had no appetite. Cinder watched from the mudroom mat, calm in the black K9 harness with reflective trim. The V-shaped notch in his right ear made his attentive stillness look almost severe. "You ready?" Griffin asked. Cinder blinked once. "Better than me," Griffin muttered. By 5:30, they were on the road. The evaluation would run nearly 6 hours. Once Griffin reported in, his phone would be sealed with the rest of the candidate's personal devices. No calls, no outside updates. No leaving the grounds unless the emergency involved the assessment itself. The rule made sense. In field rescue, divided attention could kill people. Griffin respected the rule. That was why the phone on the passenger seat felt heavier than the gear bag in the back. He had called Mavis the night before. She had answered on the third ring, accused him of checking whether she had wandered into a snowdrift for entertainment, then admitted she had already taken her evening medication. Priscilla would stop by in the morning. The monitor was charged. The kettle had been set up. Dr. Norwood's follow-up appointment remained on the calendar. Everything was covered. Griffin had repeated that to himself until the words lost meaning. The road opened ahead of him in a long gray ribbon, bordered by winter fields and dark tree lines. Cinder shifted once in the rear compartment, then settled again. His amber eyes met Griffin's through the mirror. North Valley was 40 minutes away when the phone rang. Unknown number. For a second, Griffin let it ring. He had promised himself he would not let every call pull him back from the edge of this chance. Then the display changed as the system identified the caller through dispatch records. Priscilla Moreland. He answered through the vehicle speaker. Priscilla. Her voice came tight and breathless, stripped of its usual brightness. Griffin, it's Mavis. His right hand tightened on the wheel. What happened? The monitor alarm went off. I couldn't reach her by phone, so I used the spare key. She was down by the back door, near the porch. The ambulance is here now. The highway seemed to narrow. Is she conscious? She wasn't when I found her. She came around for a second when they loaded her, but she didn't know where she was. They're taking her to Lake County Medical. Griffin checked the mirror without meaning to. Cinder was standing now, not staring toward some impossible direction, not giving an alert to the road. He was watching Griffin, reading the change in his breathing, the way his shoulders had locked, the sudden stillness in his hands. Priscilla continued, softer now. They asked for her emergency contact. She put you down after the last hospital visit. I thought you needed to know before you went in. Before you went in, the words carried everything. If Griffin kept driving, he could still make the reporting time. He would park, check in, surrender his phone, and step into the assessment he had been fighting toward for 2 years. By noon, he might be cleared. By evening, he might have a place on the winter response roster. Mavis would not be alone in a medical sense. That mattered. Griffin did not pretend otherwise. Paramedics had her. Lake County Medical knew her history. Dr. Norwood's notes would be in the chart. Priscilla was on her way or already following. There would be nurses, monitors, oxygen, medication, trained hands doing work Griffin could not do. He could not restart a heart. He could not interpret an EKG better than a doctor. He could not save Mavis by standing beside a hospital bed. The thought should have made the decision easier. Instead, it made the real reason clearer. He saw his mother's name on an old voicemail. He saw the hospital number he had missed years ago because he was too far away, too useful elsewhere. Too late by the time anyone said the word final. He had told himself for years that he had not chosen to be absent. That was true. This morning, absence had become a choice. Griffin? Priscilla asked. He passed a sign for North Valley, 27 miles. His turn signal clicked once. Then he moved into the left lane, reached the crossover, and turned the SUV around. I'm coming, he said. Priscilla exhaled, and the sound nearly broke. Drive safe. He ended the call and immediately dialed North Valley. Alton Greaves answered on the second transfer. Deputy Director Greaves. Sergeant Lockridge, I'm withdrawing from the assessment. There was a pause, but not a dramatic one. Griffin could hear paper shifting somewhere on the other end. Reason? Emergency involving my listed contact. She's en route to Lake County Medical. I'm responding there. Are you being dispatched officially? No. Another pause. Griffin appreciated that Alton did not rush to fill it with judgment. You understand the assessment cannot be delayed, Greaves said. I do. You also understand this supplemental slot was the final available entry in this winter cycle. Yes, sir. If you withdraw, your file closes at the end of the cycle. You would need to reapply in a future period if you choose to pursue the team again. I understand. Alton's voice remained even. For the record, are you medically unable to participate? No. Ordered elsewhere by your department? No. Then I will document this as voluntary withdrawal prior to reporting. Griffin looked at the road unwinding in the opposite direction now, the morning sun cutting across the dashboard. Document it that way. A quiet breath moved through the line. Very well, Sergeant. I hope your contact is all right. Thank you. The call ended. No threat, no accusation. No one slamming a door, just a clean line drawn through the future he had imagined. Cinder remained standing until Griffin spoke. Down. The dog lowered himself, but his eyes stayed on Griffin in the mirror. Griffin drove faster than he wanted to and slower than fear demanded. That was the discipline left to him. The roads were clear, but clear roads made a man believe he could outrun consequence. He could not. At Lake County Medical, the emergency entrance looked the same as it had weeks ago. Same automatic doors, same salted pavement, same fluorescent lights spilling onto the ambulance bay. This time, Griffin did not arrive as the responding officer who had found a stranger in the snow. He arrived as the name on the form. That difference hit harder than he expected. Priscilla stood near the waiting area windows, still wearing a purple great over what looked like pajamas tucked into snow boots. Her red glasses sat crooked on her nose. The large key ring at her wrist trembled faintly when she hugged herself. She did not make a joke when she saw him. That frightened him more than anything. She's awake, Priscilla said before he could ask, confused, angry, and alive. Griffin let out a breath he had not known he was holding. What happened? She got up to open the back curtains, I think. Maybe to check the bird feeder. The monitor sent the alert. When I came in, the kettle was still warm. Priscilla looked toward the hall. She would be furious I told you that. She can take it up with me. She will. A nurse called Griffin's name a few minutes later. He went through the doors alone. Cinder remained with Priscilla in the waiting area, on a down stay beside her chair. The German shepherd rested his head on his paws, but his eyes followed Griffin until the doors closed. Mavis was propped against pillows in a curtained room, her hair loose around her face and the hospital blanket tucked up under her arms. A monitor beeped steadily beside the bed. Color had returned to her cheeks, but she looked tired in a way she would hate anyone noticing. The first thing she did was glare at him. What, she demanded, are you doing here? Griffin stopped near the foot of the bed. You were unconscious. I was briefly unavailable. Mavis. Do not Mavis me. You had an assessment. So did you. Mine involved lying down, not by choice. She pointed a finger at him. The IV line tugged lightly at her wrist. You turn around right now. No. The word came out calm and final. Her anger sharpened because fear had nowhere else to go. I had paramedics. I had Priscilla. I had doctors. I did not need you throwing away your future because my heart decided to be theatrical. I know. You know? Yes. Then why are you standing there? Because the last time I was not. The answer rose in him with such force that he had to look away. Mavis saw it. The room changed. She lowered her hand. Griffin moved to the chair beside the bed but did not sit. You're right. They can do things for you that I can't. They can read the monitor. They can give medication. They can keep you alive. His voice roughened, but none of them can be here in my place. Mavis closed her eyes. For a long moment, the only sound was the monitor and the distant movement of hospital wheels in the corridor. When she opened her eyes again, the anger had not vanished. It had become something more fragile. You had no right, she whispered. I know. I worked very hard to give you that chance. Griffin went still. Mavis looked away too late. What did you say? Nothing. Mavis. She stared at the blanket, her mouth pressed into a thin line. In the next bed over, behind another curtain, someone laughed at a television show too quietly to be part of their world. Finally, Mavis sighed. I called Walter Pemberton. Griffin did not speak. And before you make that face, I did not ask him to fix anything. I asked him what the proper process was. What process? The process for making sure the board saw more than a blank space where your name should have been. He sat down slowly. Mavis kept talking because stopping would have been harder. She told him about the forms. About Nadine. About the limited hospital confirmation. About Walter's letter that did not request special treatment. About Alton Greaves opening a review file and asking for official records instead of accepting anyone's emotional version of events. Griffin listened without interruption. At first, he felt shock, then discomfort, then something deeper and more dangerous than gratitude. For years, people had helped him because it was their job. Therapists, supervisors, trainers, evaluators, partners. Help came attached to roles, forms, schedules, duty statements. Mavis had no duty. She had been cold and frightened on a road because her car failed and her body betrayed her for one dangerous morning. Griffin had stopped. That should have ended the account. Instead, she had spent weeks making sure the truth did not disappear into a line of administrative closure. "You did all that," he said, "and you didn't tell me. I knew you would stop me. I would have." "Exactly." His throat tightened. "Why?" Mavis looked at him then. Her eyes were wet but steady. "Because somebody should stand beside you without making you prove you deserve it first." The sentence found the place he had guarded longest. Griffin looked down at his hands. The scar near his wrist seemed pale under the hospital light. He thought of his mother's unplayed message. He thought of Mavis at her kitchen table with Arthur's address book. He thought of the second-place setting, the old scanner, the way she had said, "Don't worry about Mom," and then looked as frightened by the word as he had felt. He reached for her hand. Her fingers were cold but strong. "You shouldn't have had to do that," he said. "I know. I don't know how to pay that back." Mavis gave a small, broken laugh. "Good. I wasn't selling it." The laugh nearly undid him. He bowed his head, still holding her hand, and the word came before he gave himself permission to decide. "Mom." Mavis stopped breathing. Not medically, not dangerously, just long enough for the room to understand what had happened. Her face folded, not into sorrow, not exactly, but into recognition so sudden it looked almost painful. Tears gathered and slipped before she could hide them. For once, she did not reach to straighten her sleeve or make a joke. Griffin looked up, afraid he had taken too much, but Mavis only tightened her fingers around his. "Oh, Griffin," she whispered, "that was all." The door opened a crack. Priscilla peered in, then immediately covered her mouth with one hand, as if she had walked into church at the wrong moment. Cinder was beside her, still on leash, waiting. Griffin gave the smallest nod. Priscilla brought him in. Cinder crossed the room without haste. He did not jump onto the bed or disturb the IV line. He came to the open space between Griffin's chair and Mavis's bed, then rested his head gently on the mattress edge near their joined hands. Mavis placed her free hand on his head. The monitor kept its steady rhythm. Nothing outside the room had changed. The assessment was gone. The winter team would move forward. The official file would close because Griffin had asked it to close. But in that small hospital room, no one spoke of losing. Cinder had not found a hidden answer. He had not saved a career or carried some impossible message across the snow. He only stayed. For two people who had both spent years mistaking endurance for loneliness, that was enough. Griffin signed the withdrawal form 3 days after Mavis came home from the hospital. There was no ceremony in it, no dramatic meeting, no folded flag, no final handshake beside a helicopter or a snowfield or any of the images he had carried in his head for 2 years. Just a desk in Chief Delmont Avery's office, a printed form from North Valley, and Griffin's name written in blue ink beneath the line marked voluntary withdrawal. From current evaluation cycle. Chief Avery sat across from him without speaking at first. Morning light came through the blinds behind his desk, striped across files, coffee rings, and the winter welfare folder Griffin had once dismissed as paperwork. "You sure?" Avery asked. Griffin capped the pen. "Yes, that answer come from guilt or clarity. A little of both," Griffin said. Avery studied him over the rim of his reading glasses. The chief looked tired in the way good supervisors often looked tired, not from doing one thing too long, but from carrying too many people's unfinished weather inside him. "I can't protect you from talk," Avery said. "I'm not asking you to. No, you stopped doing that a while ago." By noon, most of the department knew. Nobody said much directly. Police stations were rarely as loud about judgment as people imagined. Judgment lived in pauses, glances, the way conversations shifted when a man walked into the room. One officer near the lockers said Griffin had done the decent thing. Another said the winter team could not use someone who might leave an operation if a personal call came in. A dispatcher who had worked with Griffin for years only placed a coffee beside his keyboard and walked away without comment. Griffin heard enough. He did not answer any of it. That evening he returned to patrol with Cinder. The work was ordinary and necessary. A minor collision outside the grocery store. A welfare check on an elderly man whose furnace had failed. A loose dog near a school bus route. Cinder handled the calls with the same steady discipline he gave everything, his notched ear turning toward voices, his amber eyes calm in the flashing wash of blue light. Griffin did his job cleanly, but something had shifted. Before, he had treated regular duty like a waiting room, a place to stand until the door back to the winter team opened. Now the door had closed, and the waiting room was all there was. He expected the room to feel smaller. Instead, after a few days, he began noticing how many people were inside it. Mavis came home with a plan, not permission. Nadine Crowhurst made that clear during the discharge meeting at Lake County Medical. She sat at the end of Mavis's kitchen table with her yellow notebook open, her black-framed glasses low on her nose, and the patience of someone who had seen families confuse concern with control too many times. "Mavis remains the decision-maker," Nadine said, looking at Griffin first, then Priscilla, then Mavis herself. "Everyone at this table is here because she agrees to it." Mavis, wrapped in her burgundy cardigan, lifted her chin. "I appreciate being described as present while sitting in my own kitchen." Nadine smiled. "Then I'll continue." Priscilla Moreland sat beside the stove with a plate of biscuits balanced on one knee, red cat-eye glasses bright against her face. Her key ring rested on the table like a small metal animal. "I have agreed to morning calls," she said, "and I have agreed not to kick in the door unless there is genuine cause." "You have agreed to knock first," Mavis corrected. "That depends on tone." Griffin stood near the counter, arms folded, trying not to look as if every item on the plan had become a personal responsibility. Cinder lay near the warm vent, head on his paws, listening to the room as if every voice mattered equally. The plan was simple because Nadine insisted simple plans survived storms better than impressive ones. Mavis would remain at home. Priscilla would keep the spare key and make morning check-ins. Griffin would remain the emergency contact, not the manager of Mavis's life. The heart monitor would stay in use while Dr. Celeste Norwood reviewed the data. Medication would remain in the organizer Mavis filled herself. A home health aide would visit twice a week until the cardiology follow-up. "And driving?" Griffin asked. Mavis's eyes narrowed. Dr. Norwood had already answered that question at the hospital, but Griffin asked anyway. Nadine glanced at Mavis. Temporary pause until clearance. "I dislike the phrase pause," Mavis said. "It sounds like my car has opinions." "Your car has had too many opinions," Priscilla said. Griffin almost smiled. Mavis caught it. "Do not enjoy this." "I'm not. You absolutely are." The home health aide arrived the next morning, a woman named Lydia Ross, with gentle hands, gray sneakers, and the practical cheer of someone who could enter a stranger's home without making the stranger feel invaded. Lydia complimented the old scanner on the shelf before she commented on any medical equipment, which made Mavis tolerate her almost immediately. Griffin watched that and learned something. Help went down easier when it did not introduce itself as rescue. He kept attending therapy. Dr. Elise Varn did not congratulate him for withdrawing from the winter team. She did not condemn him either. In her office above the pharmacy, with traffic hissing through slush outside the window, she asked the one question he had been avoiding. "What did you lose?" Griffin looked at the rug between his boots. A job. Only that he thought of the training fields, the search maps, the part of himself that still believed danger was the only place he had permission to matter. "No," he said. "I lost the story I was using." Dr. Varn let that sit. That was the way she worked. She did not rush toward the wound. She waited until he stopped circling it. 2 sessions later, Griffin brought his phone. He had not planned to. At least, he told himself he had not planned to. But when he left for Mavis's house that afternoon, the phone was in his jacket pocket with his mother's last voicemail saved under her name, untouched but no longer buried. Mavis did not ask why he was quiet. She made coffee. She set 2 cups on the table. She placed 1 biscuit on a napkin beside Cinder, who looked to Griffin for permission before accepting it. "You look like a man deciding whether a bridge will hold," she said. Griffin sat across from her. "It's the message," he said. Mavis's face changed gently. "Your mother's?" He nodded. The old scanner murmured from the shelf, low enough to be background. Outside, snow slid from the porch roof in soft thumps. Priscilla had cleared the walk that morning. Lydia had left a note on the counter reminding Mavis to drink more water. The house had begun to gather evidence of people returning. Griffin set the phone on the table. His thumb hovered over the screen. "I don't know what I'm afraid she'll say," he admitted. Mavis did not reach for the phone. "Maybe you're not afraid of what she'll say. Maybe you're afraid it will be the last new thing she ever gives you." The sentence went through him quietly. There were truths that did not break a man. They simply removed the last wall he had been leaning on. Griffin pressed play. His mother's voice filled the kitchen, thinner than memory, warm with the faint rasp she used to get when she was tired. "Hey, honey, I know you're probably out where the signal's bad again. Don't worry about calling tonight if you can't. Your aunt is here fussing at me, so I'm well supervised." A small laugh. Griffin closed his eyes. "I just wanted to hear your voicemail greeting, I suppose. That sounds foolish, doesn't it? I'm proud of you. I hope you know that. Not because of the uniform. Not because of all the people you try to save. Just because you're mine." The kitchen disappeared. There was only the voice. "And Griffin, listen to me. You don't owe the world a life sentence for being good at helping. Come home when you can. Eat something that isn't from a gas station. And stop carrying every goodbye like it was a debt." The message ended with a soft click. No one moved. Mavis sat with one hand around her cup, eyes lowered to give him privacy without leaving him alone. Cinder had placed his head across Griffin's boot. Griffin cried then. Not loudly. Not beautifully. He bent forward, one hand over his eyes, and let grief do the ordinary work it had waited years to do. Mavis did not touch him at first. When she finally did, it was only her hand resting near his wrist, close to the scar he always rubbed when he could not say what hurt. No one told him it was all right. That helped. After that day, Griffin stopped reading Avery's winter welfare folder like an assignment and began reading it like a map. The first version of the pilot was neat, well-intended, and incomplete. It listed residents over 75. It marked high-risk addresses. It created a phone tree and response levels for severe weather. It was better than nothing, which meant it would be mistaken for enough unless someone challenged it early. Griffin began writing notes in the margins. What about people under 75 with oxygen concentrators? What about seniors who refuse shelters because pets are not allowed? Who tracks backup batteries for medical devices? What happens when a person with early dementia answers the phone and says everything is fine? Do volunteers know how to approach someone in panic without crowding them? Could K9 teams assist in locating people who leave home during confusion events? Who coordinates with pharmacies when roads close? Where do we log preferred contacts, not just legal contacts? He brought the marked-up folder to Avery's office on a Monday morning. Avery read the first page, then the second. By the third, he leaned back in his chair and looked at Griffin differently. This is more than edits. Yes, sir. This is a rebuild. The old version waits until people are already missing. Avery closed the folder halfway. That sounds familiar. Griffin accepted the hit because it was fair. I can draft a field model, he said. K9 support where appropriate, not as intimidation, not as spectacle. Cinder has a calming effect with some people. We can train officers to use distance, posture, voice. We can coordinate with Nadine's office and animal services. Maybe create storm profiles for residents who consent. Avery folded his hands over the folder. You understand this isn't glamorous. I'm starting to think glamour may be the least useful part of rescue." The chief was quiet for a long moment. Then he slid the folder back. "Write the model." That did not make it Griffin's program. The next 6 weeks proved that. The proposal went through the department command staff, the county hospital board, the town council's public safety subcommittee, and one budget meeting so dull Griffin considered it a test of moral endurance. Nadine argued for privacy protections. Dr. Norwood submitted a short advisory note on cardiac risk residents during winter power failures. Priscilla attended one community meeting and told the council that if they could fund holiday banners downtown, they could fund reflective house number signs for people ambulances were expected to find in snow. No one knew how to respond to that. The budget remained small. The approval came with limits: 1-year pilot, quarterly review, shared resources, no new full-time hires at first. It was not a victory parade. It was a door cracked open. Griffin was chosen to lead the field portion because he had K-9 experience, rescue training, patrol credibility, and a plan detailed enough to survive practical questions. Delmont made that clear in writing. There would be no narrative of sacrifice rewarded, no sentimental appointment. "You built something workable," Avery told him. "That is why you're assigned to it." Griffin nodded. He found that he preferred it that way. That evening, he drove to Mavis's house with the approved pilot folder on the passenger seat. He did not bring flowers. Mavis would have accused him of being dramatic. He brought a new reflective number plate for her mailbox and a printed volunteer information form for Priscilla, who had already announced she would be impossible to supervise. Mavis was on the porch when he arrived, wrapped in her green coat, burgundy scarf tucked neatly at her throat. Cinder stepped out of the SUV and waited for the release before crossing the walk. Mavis looked at the folder under Griffin's arm. "Well?" she asked. It passed. Her smile started small and then failed at being small. "You're leading it?" "The field portion. That sounds like something. It's a pilot. That also sounds like something." He stood at the bottom of the porch steps. The snow around his boots blew in the fading light. "It isn't the winter team," he said. Mavis looked past him to the lake, where the last sun sat low on the ice. "No," she said, "it's not." For once, she did not rush to make the loss smaller. Griffin appreciated that more than comfort. After a while, he looked down at Cinder. The dog sat between them, steady and waiting, his breath rising into the cold. "I think," Griffin said slowly, "it may be the first thing I chose without trying to get back to who I was." Mavis's eyes softened. Inside the house, Arthur's old scanner crackled faintly with the weather band. Snow tonight, falling temperatures. Refreeze by morning, there would always be another storm. For the first time in a long while, Griffin did not need the storm to prove he belonged in it. He only needed to know who might be alone when it came. By the time winter returned to Lake Briar, the town had learned to take Griffin Lockridge seriously in an entirely new way. Not because he raised his voice. He almost never did. Not because he wore the old candidate patch from North Valley. That patch had been removed months ago and returned without ceremony. People listened now because Griffin had stopped speaking, as if rescue only began when a siren did. The winter welfare response pilot began on the first Monday after Thanksgiving, under a sky the color of brushed steel. Snow had not yet fallen hard enough to close roads, but it gathered along fence rails and roof lines, waiting. The lake had a thin glaze along the edges. The air smelled of pine smoke, wet wool, and the first real cold of the season. In the community room behind Lake Briar Police Department, folding chairs faced a whiteboard covered in names, zones, weather triggers, and emergency contact notes. Young officers stood beside volunteer drivers, hospital staff, 2 animal shelter workers, and a small army of neighbors who had brought their own pens because they did not trust the town to provide good ones. Priscilla Moreland sat in the front row wearing a plum-colored coat and red glasses, her key ring shining in her lap like official equipment. Nadine Crowhurst stood near the wall with her yellow notebook open, correcting forms before anyone had the chance to misuse them. Chief Delmont Avery watched from the back, arms folded, expression unreadable, except to those who knew him well enough to see approval hiding beneath discipline. Mavis Wainwright sat beside the whiteboard, not in a place of honor. She had refused that. She sat where she could interrupt efficiently. An address is not a person. She told the room, after Griffin explained the first check-in route. If all you know is where someone lives, you know almost nothing. A young officer near the back shifted in his chair. Mavis saw him. Yes, Officer Brent, I do mean that. Mrs. Hanley at number 14 will tell anyone in uniform she is fine because she thinks admitting otherwise means someone will put her in a facility. Mr. Boone on Ridge Road will leave his house in a blizzard before he leaves his beagle behind, and Mr. Sutter will not answer his phone during game shows, no matter how close to death he may be. A ripple of laughter moved through the room. Griffin leaned against the table beside Cinder, who lay calmly at his feet in a black collar rather than full tactical gear. The German shepherd's notched ear turned toward Mavis whenever she spoke. He had learned her voice the way he learned roots, commands, and the sound of Griffin's breathing when trouble moved closer than words. Mavis lifted one of the new volunteer cards. These are not just forms, they are promises. If someone tells you they are afraid of hospitals, you write it down. If they say their cat hides under the bed when strangers come, you write it down. If they say the back steps ice over before the front ones, you write it down. Details are not clutter. Details are how people survive being helped. No one laughed that time. Griffin looked around the room and saw something he would not have understood a year earlier. This was not smaller than rescue. It was rescue before the ice cracked. Over the next few weeks, the pilot became less neat and more real. Phone trees failed because volunteers forgot passwords. 2 residents refused to sign consent forms until Nadine rewrote the explanation in plain language. The animal shelter discovered that emergency pet crates were too large for the back of one patrol unit. Priscilla argued with the town clerk over reflective house number signs, and won by being more patient than anyone expected and more terrifying than anyone admitted. Cinder trained with officers on approach distance and posture. Griffin showed them how a dog could calm a frightened person only if the handler did not turn the moment into a performance. No crowding, no dramatic commands. No letting the uniform fill the whole room before the human being had space to breathe. One afternoon, a rookie officer asked whether Cinder could make a confused person cooperate. Griffin looked at him for a long moment. Cinder doesn't make people do anything, he said. He gives them something steady to decide around. The officer nodded, embarrassed but wiser. Mavis later told Griffin that was the best sentence he had said all week. He told her not to sound surprised. She said surprise was good for circulation. The program did not save everyone from everything. Griffin would not have trusted it if it claimed to. But it caught small things before they became final things. A dead phone battery, a missed medication refill, a furnace that sounded wrong, a driveway no ambulance could find after dark, a widow who said she did not need help but had stopped buying groceries because the road to town frightened her after the first ice. By January, Lake Briar had not become safer in any heroic way. It had become more attentive. That was harder work. One late afternoon, after a training session at the department, Griffin drove to Mavis's house with a folder on the passenger seat and Cinder watching through the rear barrier. Snow fell in slow, open flakes, not heavy enough to threaten travel, just enough to soften the fields and turn the bare trees silver. Mavis's house looked exactly as it had the first day he visited, and nothing like it. The green shutters were the same. The porch still faced the lake. Arthur's old shed still leaned slightly to one side, despite Griffin's opinion that it should either be repaired properly or stop pretending to stand. But the mailbox now carried a reflective number plate. The walkway had sand buckets at both ends. A small motion light glowed above the back steps. Priscilla's blue sedan was not in the driveway, but Griffin knew she had already made her morning call because the check-in log had confirmed it at 8:07. Cinder waited at the bottom of the porch steps until Griffin gave the release. Mavis opened the door before he knocked. "You are late," she said. "I'm 4 minutes early. That is late for you." She wore her green wool coat over a cream blouse, burgundy scarf tucked at the throat. Her hair was clipped back with Arthur's metal leaf pin. She looked steadier than she had in the hospital, though Griffin still saw the small pauses she hid between movements. Cinder stopped at the threshold and looked up at her. Mavis sighed. Yes, yes, permission granted. Only then did he step inside and place his head against her knee. In the living room, Arthur's old scanner rested on the shelf, softly carrying the weather band. Beside it stood a framed photograph from the pilot's opening day. Mavis at the whiteboard, Griffin half turned toward her, Cinder sitting between them as if he had been assigned to keep both humans from becoming too serious. Mavis noticed Griffin looking at it. "I still say my hair looked windblown. It was inside. Then the building had a draft." Griffin set the folder on the kitchen table. Mavis's expression changed, not with fear, but with recognition. "Those are the papers. They're copies. The originals are filed where you wanted them." She sat slowly. He did not help because she had not asked. That, too, was something he had learned. The documents were not dramatic. Emergency contact forms, authorization for the hospital to speak with Griffin if Mavis could not speak for herself, a healthcare proxy she had chosen freely, medication lists, storm instructions, a spare key agreement, notes about Priscilla, Lydia, Dr. Norwood, and the order in which people should be called. No ownership, no dependency, no quiet theft of Mavis's independence disguised as care. Griffin had reviewed the forms because she asked him to. Mavis had signed them because she had decided to. She touched the top page. Arthur would have complained about the font. Arthur sounds like a man who had priorities. He used to say bad paperwork caused good people trouble. He wasn't wrong. For a while, they went through the folder together, not because anything needed changing, but because Mavis liked knowing where every promise lived. When the last page was placed back in order, Griffin did not stand. Mavis looked up. The scanner crackled faintly from the shelf. Outside, snow tapped the window glass with almost no sound. Cinder lay beneath the table, his head resting across Griffin's boot. Griffin had practiced the words twice in his truck and once in his kitchen. Practice had made them worse. Everything prepared sounded too formal, too careful, too much like asking for permission to enter a place where he already stood. So he stopped trying to say it well. "I can't get my parents back," he said. Mavis's face softened, but she did not interrupt. "I don't want to replace Arthur. I don't want paperwork to make this into an obligation, and I don't want you thinking I'm asking because you got sick, or because I feel responsible." His thumb moved once over the scar near his wrist. He made himself stop. "I'm asking because when something happens in my life now, you're the person I want to tell. And when I leave this house, I think about coming back before I'm halfway down the road." Mavis looked at him without blinking. Griffin's voice lowered. "If you're willing, I'd like to spend the rest of my life calling you Mom." The old house seemed to breathe around them. Mavis did not cry at once. She reached across the table, placed one hand against his face, and studied him the way mothers study children they have been waiting years to meet. Then she said, "You have been calling me that for a long time. Today you finally admitted it." The words undid him more gently than grief had. Mavis stood, and this time when he rose to steady her, she let him. Not because she needed it. Because letting someone be close was not the same as surrender. She put her arms around him. Griffin held her carefully at first, then less carefully when she tightened her grip. Cinder rose under the table, bumped his head between them, and forced both of them to step back laughing with wet eyes. "You see," Mavis said, wiping her cheek with the heel of her hand, "he disapproves of solemnity. He disapproves of being excluded. That is also reasonable." The winter deepened after that, not in a cruel way. In the way winter always deepened, darker mornings, sharper wind, the lake sealing itself under ice, porchlets coming on earlier and staying on longer. On a soft gray morning in late January, Griffin stood outside his SUV while Cinder waited in the rear compartment. He wore the navy polo and gray field jacket of the community K-9 program instead of the heavier patrol vest. A radio sat at his belt. A first aid kit rested in the cargo area. The day's schedule included a training at the senior center, a route review with 2 officers, and a visit to a woman who had agreed to meet Cinder before the next storm because she was afraid of dogs and more afraid of being alone. Mavis stood on the porch with coffee in one hand and her burgundy scarf wrapped twice around her neck. "You have reminded me about my medication 3 times, she called. "I counted twice. You counted wrong. Priscilla comes at 10. She told me, "No shoveling. It is decorative snow. No shoveling decorative snow." Mavis rolled her eyes. "You are becoming more like Arthur every month." Griffin looked at her, then passed her to the lake where pale light stretched over the ice. "There are worse things for a police officer to become." That quieted her for a moment. Then she smiled. Cinder looked through the rear window, amber eyes fixed on the porch. His tail moved once when Mavis lifted her hand. Griffin climbed into the driver's seat. As the SUV rolled down the driveway, he checked the mirror. Mavis remained on the porch, small against the white yard and steady beneath the winter sky. She had Priscilla. She had Nadine's number on the refrigerator. She had Lydia coming Friday, Dr. Norwood's follow-up next week, a working scanner, a charged monitor, and a stubborn right to decide how her own life would be lived. More than that, she had someone leaving who intended to return. The road curved away from the lake. Cinder kept watching until the house vanished behind the trees. For years, Griffin had believed the future waited at the end of the road he had spent his life preparing for. He had believed purpose was something earned under pressure, proven in danger, measured by whether he could reach someone before the ice gave way. Twice, he had turned away from that road. The first time for a stranger in the snow. The second time for someone who had become family before either of them knew what to call it. He had thought those turns cost him his future. Now, driving toward a day made of small check-ins, careful training, ordinary names, and doors that might open because someone knocked early enough, Griffin understood that the future was not always waiting where a man expected it. Sometimes it began at the exact moment he stopped passing by. Sometimes it wore a burgundy scarf and stood on a porch with coffee going cold in one hand. Sometimes it breathed quietly from the back of a K-9 unit, loyal enough not to lead, only to stay. And sometimes the longest way around was the first road that truly brought a man home. Sometimes the road we planned is not the road that brings us home. Griffin thought he was losing his future each time he turned away from the life he had trained for. But in stopping for Mavis, in staying when it mattered, and in learning to be needed without proving himself, he found something deeper than a title. He found peace. He found family. He found a different kind of calling. Maybe some of us are still carrying goodbyes we never got to say, or regrets we do not know how to put down. But grace has a quiet way of meeting us in ordinary places. A porch light, a phone call, a loyal dog, a person who chooses to stay. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us who this reminded you of and where you're watching from. And if you enjoy stories about loyalty, healing, and second chances, please like, share, and subscribe. May your road be gentle, your home be warm, and may you never forget that sometimes God brings us back to life through the people we stop for.